So can we please welcome to the back of our stage, Kent Barker.
They call me Mr. Hastings. Actually, they don't. They call me John Collier. Well, they would do if I hadn't been dead for 260 years. So, this is a little story about John Collier and about the town he lived in, which was indeed Hastings. But we need a script first. This is what you might know today as Old Hastings House. In my day, it was a brand new house. I had it built, or I moved into it and bought it in about 1706. It was my home, and the question is, after my death, who is going to inherit it? There are a few options among my children. The lawyer who's looking after my will decided that he would summon the children together after my death and that of my wife, and he said it was agreed on Hastings by all parties to meet in that place on Midsummer's Day next to determine the business respecting the future of the house and the land. So, let's go into the house, let's go up the stairs, let's go into the elegant dining room and join, perhaps as a fly on the wall, the meeting that Midsummer's Day. There is, firstly, my daughter, Cordelia Collier, and her husband, General James Murray. He's actually done quite well for himself as an army general, largely helped by my buying him a couple of commissions. He served with General Wolfe at Quebec, became the first Governor General of Canada, and now has come back to try and grab the house that was mine, and we'll see how he gets on. There's another daughter, which is Mary Collier, and she's married to Edward Millward, a name that perhaps is familiar in Hastings. He's a bit of a loudmouth, but he goes on to be mayor of Hastings, I think 26 times, was it something like that? 26 times, rather eclipsing my 5 times as mayor. He's also trying to get his hands on my house. Then there are the other daughters, the Sarah Collier and Jane Collier. They are also married and their husbands are there. So there's a group of people assembled in the dining room. But General James Murray has got his eye on something else as well. He wants to get hold of my stables because, as he says, sorry, we've gone too far. Whoops. We're still going too far. Let's go back. Where's it going? Ah, there we are. Right. He says, I'm offered 1,000 for them, and the purchasers are a set of gentlemen who've entered into a subscription to make Hastings a bathing place, and think the stable's necessary for an assembly room, and I have little doubt of getting the sum I ask. In fact, he never did get his hands on the stables, and he never did turn it into an assembly room, and it did rather later on become the theatre that you now know quite well. Okay, so let's have a little look at Hastings in the period that I was alive, from 1700 onwards. Before the hordes of the holiday makers arrived to pursue their madness for sea bathing, there were just 2,000 people in the town during almost the whole of my lifetime. Within 50 years of my death, around 1800, that had arisen to 3,000. But 50 years later, by 1850, it was a full 17,000. So what was the town like in my period? Well, this is a map of it drawn by my schoolmaster and a friend of mine, Samuel Cant. He drew it in 1746. But a few years earlier, there'd been a survey done by the Hastings Corporation of the main trades in the town. This included 7 carpenters, 7 masons, 3 coopers, 2 glaziers, 5 smiths, 3 weavers, 2 periwig makers, very important, and assorted chandlers, cheesemongers, maltsters. Well, you can read it there, but there are also a lot of them. There were a full 10 butchers, and they worked in the shambles on Butchers Row, which was just across from St Clement's Church up what is now Croft Road, and very unpopular they were. They ignored the Sabbath and hung their meat out in such a way as to annoy passers-by, apparently. So, the town is concentrated mainly on 2 roads. The first one to the left is All Saints Street, is what's called Market Street at the time, and now is, of course, the High Street. On the right-hand side, that is All Saints Street, but then was known as Fisher Row because the fishermen tended to hang out there. There were about 200 people who earned their living through fishing, but of course during the herring and the mackerel runs, virtually the whole town would turn out to crew the boats to help bring in the catch. Okay, running between the 2 streets, in the middle is of course the Bourne Stream, which you can't see now because it's under a road, but in 1700 it was about the lifeblood of the town. It provided drinking water for most of the people there, it provided the water needed for 2 or 3 breweries, but it also provided the water for assorted wildfowl and animals. It was in fact an extremely muddy and grubby and unpleasant stream. Now then, opposite, where are we? Yes, opposite All Saints Church and dominating the entrance to the town was my house. When I bought it, it had been completely rebuilt in the latest early Georgian style, and it cost me £300. Now you might well ask, where did I get the money? My salary at the time was £10 a year as a town clerk. My father was an innkeeper in Eastbourne, so we weren't exactly rich. Well, the answer is I married well. I married a lady called Elizabeth Elphick. Some said the money came from her father, an impertinent little pipsqueak called Kent Barker, who's written a biography of me. He claimed that we married, when we married, the child may not have been, she was already pregnant, and the child may not have been mine. So her father perhaps was delighted that I was prepared to take her off his hands and gave me the £300. I couldn't possibly comment. So, Hastings in 1706, aged 21, I arrived. I took up my new job as clerk to the Hastings Corporation. I took up my new bride Elizabeth, and I moved into my new house. It was a good year for me. Now, I'm not going to bore you with the details of my life. I took on apprentices, I started a law firm, I got many other jobs as well. I became solicitor to the Cinque Ports, clerk to the Commissioner of Sewers, Commissioner for Land Tax, clerk to the Hastings Militia, etc., etc., etc. And I wasn't idle on the domestic front either. Between 1706 and 1714 I had 6 children. Sadly, only 2 survived, and my wife Elizabeth also died in 1714, leaving me a widower at the age of 29. Well, after her death, I started a law firm in London, began to commute. Now, commuting was not easy in those days. The first stagecoach between Hastings and London didn't arrive until 1745, and that took 3 days to get from Hastings up to the city. The roads basically were diabolical. To get to London, I would have to ride on horseback up to Sevenoaks. That took a full day, and then get a coach from there to the rest of London. John Cranston, who was my legal partner, he recorded a journey, wrote to me a letter recording a journey he took a little bit later on in the 1740s. It took him 9 hours to get from Battle to Maresfield. I'll just read you a little bit of it was a 20-mile journey, it took 9 hours. Netherfield down, we took Ye High Road about half a mile, confounded bad. Down to Brightling down, very indifferent. Through Dollington Forest, very bad indeed. Heathfield down to Crossing Hands, intolerable. Here we arrived soon after 1, being 5 hours, coming 12 miles. Between Buxted and Maresfield, we met some road as bad, if not worse than any before, and so bad that the horses couldn't draw us through, so we were forced to get out in the middle and scramble through it as well we could. Now, Cranston was not just my legal partner, he was my brother-in-law, because in 1717 I married his sister Mary Cranston. She was the vicar's daughter, the vicar of All Saints Church, immediately opposite my house, Old Hastings House. He was a rather jolly figure, the Reverend James Cranston. At one stage, when I was courting his daughter and she was in London, he wrote to her, "Mr. Collier is busy repairing his house. You have so contrived matters as to keep me sober by taking away the keys to my cellars. And if you send them not by the carrier next Saturday, I must break open the doors." We married on the 13th of August. Mary moved across the road to my house, became my stepmother to my two daughters from my first marriage. But we didn't waste much time starting our own family. In all, we had 18 children, though amazingly and sadly, only 7 survived infancy. And the saddest loss of all for me was my 2 sons, John and James. John died of smallpox in 1732, and his brother died in his mid-20s, having become a lawyer, and served 1 term as mayor of Hastings. In the 11th of June 1727, His Majesty King George I died at Honnesbrook. Plans for his coronation of his son were put in hand. There was no custom that Cinque Ports could nominate people to be canopy bearers at royal coronations. Now, as mayor of Hastings twice, I was chosen as the canopy bearer for the coronation of George II and Queen Caroline. I was pretty excited. I wrote back to Mary in Hastings, "It's expected that the coronation will exceed all that ever was in magnificence and grandeur. The Queen's clothes are to be the richest possible and all covered in diamonds." And so, on the 11th of October 1727, I was in Westminster Abbey helping to carry the canopy. And I recorded, "The whole was of the greatest splendour and magnificence. I was at the Queen's canopy, much to my satisfaction, and the procession was very agreeable, though vastly fatiguing. I can't forbear telling you that the Queen was exceedingly obliging in the procession and talked much in our corner." Anyway, after the ceremony, the staves of the canopy from the poles was given to the bearers. Mine was melted down into a ceremonial punch bowl for the Hastings Corporation to use at civic functions. Amazingly, it's no longer used today. I can't understand why not, and apparently the punch bowl languishes in a dusty storeroom. Now, does anybody know who this gentleman is? No? Well, it's Thomas Pelham Hollis, Duke of Newcastle, brother to the Prime Minister Henry Pelham. His Grace was a big benefactor of mine, got me an excellent sinecure as usher of the King's Bench, which involved absolutely no work and paid extremely well, and as Surveyor General of Riding Officers in Kent, which paid extremely well but did require a fair amount of work. But without the Duke of Newcastle, I would never have advanced so far, nor have died so rich. Of course, I did use some of my money to benefit Hastings. Take my plan to bring in fresh water. I created a reservoir near the top of the town off the London Road and brought in pipes made of hollowed out elm trees and offered the people a main supply. At the time, I said the project would provide clean water instead of the filth and slub of the high roads and from all the common drains of the town which discharge themselves into the Bourne from the careless nastiness of the poor inhabitants. The poor inhabitants note who actually had to drink the water from the Bourne. Anyway, the problem was that my reservoir, I was actually fed by the Bourne, but further upstream. So, to my astonishment, some people actually opposed the plan, arguing that I was stealing their water and then offering to sell it back to them. Well, I would have thought if you were living in a house like this in Bourne Street, you'd have been delighted to have clean water. The one Henry Sargent, no fan of mine, filed a claim for trespass, saying that I maliciously intended to deprive the plaintiff of the convenience, advantage and benefit of taking water out of the said rivulet or stream. A great part of the water was carried away and diverted for its etc., etc., etc. Unbelievably, I lost the court case and had to pay a huge sum in damages, 3 shillings, I think. Anyway, I hope I've given some idea of what your town was like in my day. This is the view from the West Hill. I owned the hill and kept rabbits up for the pot up there. That could have been Mary and me sitting in the picture. It's true to say I think that she found Hastings a little dull and preferred the gay life of battle rather than Hastings, but I loved Hastings. I loved the town and was always hankering to be back there. Whenever I was in London, I was always writing to say, you know, I miss Hastings. It was my town. Now, you might conceivably want to know what happened that Midsummer's evening, Midsummer's Day meeting in June 1768, 8 years after my death. Who got the house? Was it the Jacobite, General James Murray? Was it the loudmouth, Edward Millward? Well, I'm afraid I'm going to leave you in suspense. I'm afraid you'll have to read Mr. Barker's book to find out.